Welcome everybody to WTCtv, and this is a very special occasion. We just had a historic weekend in the wrestling card world. The Wrestling All-Stars Hulk Hogan 1982 that was on auction at Heritage sold for a whopping $132,000,
That's
setting
it?
a record. Yeah,
That's
it
it?
did. Yeah.
That's it?
You didn't get the memo, Tony?
Oh,
Setting not only we knew it was going to be the highest Hogan of all time, we knew it was going to be the second highest wrestling card of all time, but what was it, around 4 or 5 o'clock, David, when we had that exchange, when we said it could happen, we started to think beyond just the 100,000. But yeah, this could knock the Rock out tonight, and we both teased that. David did a little video just before dinner talking about that could happening, and I posted a graphic of the Rock and the Hogan card together. Again, not sure if it would, but I started to feel pretty good at around 6, 7 o'clock that was going to be the case, and sure enough, $132,000, new record. Everyone, I'm Paul and Ann from the Price Guide, here with Tony Vela from Wrestling Trading Cards and the man, David Peck. Who better to have here than to talk about Hogan Wrestling All-Stars? So what we'll do is we'll go around, everyone sort of give their thoughts on the night, and then we'll talk a little more about how we think this is going to affect the value going forward. And then that's it. Just a little quickie to talk about the night. So, David, do you want to go first?
Well, I'll tell you what, I thought that was just sort of so fascinating to watch because what I've learned with auctions in general is when they get up in price pretty quick, it has that kind of momentum feel, right? And when you mentioned the Rock Black, it didn't. It was a sleeper. So that one was just kind of like a meteoric rise in the final hours. Well, the Hogan was pacing strong right out of the gate. So, once it was up to about 60,000, we knew that it was now in number one position for a Hogan. But when that next bid came in and took it to 72 and quickly took it to 84, it was like, dude, the horse has left the barn. This thing is, it's like a bucking bronco, And I think one of the things that that particular card was a really tremendous looking card. And I think one of the things people have to keep in mind is, when there's lots of examples of a card, it could be a certain one that outperforms, within the same grade. And so I do think that one was a special card. I think that, I would be cautious to just assume every other nine is going to sell for that. You can have auctions where something gets sort of carried away, but in the bigger picture, it was just an exciting night and it was just awesome. I kept hitting refresh. I got kicked off Heritage site because they thought I was not a real person. I had to get on a different browser, because I was hitting refresh too many times. So it was great.
Tony?
yeah, yeah. I didn't watch the whole thing until towards the end. Paul and I were chatting back and forth about it, and to really kind of recap for myself, to really just to drive this point home, which I want to drive home, is that I kind of feel validated here in the sense that I've been making this point nobody else was talking about. No one else was like, we're not going to see another six-figure card unless it's a Hogan PSA 10 that shows up out of somewhere. That's only going to eclipse the Rock card. And I said, hold the horses here, people. All it takes is one person with a big wallet to go out there and make a difference. That's all it takes. And I kept making the joke that for all we know, it could be a beefcake card for all we know. Who the hell knows? All it takes is one guy with a big fat wallet to go and make a difference. And of course, it's going to be the card, which is going to be a Hogan card. So it doesn't surprise me. It's like people said that it'd be years before we saw something like this. We were 20 months removed from a big sale like this, and here it's already happened. And I guarantee you this right now, and I'll go on record saying right now, it ain't the last time we're going to see that either.
Yeah, to your point, that's what I was going to say is that I remember that it was probably about 6 months ago. I posted The Rock and I said, "Are we ever going to see $126,000 again?" And of course, the first thing that came up was there's a PSA 10 Hogan, but then that got off the table. But then right away the discussion went to, well, what else in the modern world? People were throwing around, well, if there's a one of one Logan Paul or maybe a Bad Bunny, right? But we didn't go back
Yeah.
And talk about the PSA 9s and the Beckett 9.5s that have coalesced around the 55 grand mark, and we kind of dismiss them that they wouldn't have the pop, they wouldn't have the lift to go from 50 to over 100, but they did. And it doesn't surprise me that they did. That's when we spoke earlier, Dave, if you're calling the day, when we said, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we get to six figures on this. Because David, of course, you know the numbers more. There's 17 or 19 or whatever is in the registry of nines, right? There's a whole lot of space between 55 grand and 130. So there's that whole tier of dollars, for money to be made for guys that have bought these and want to sell them that aren't just keeping them. So yeah, you're right, Tony. And you did say that. And I remember that, because what's it been, a year and 5 months or something?
I, I poked fun at people who were talking like, well, it has to be a Bad Bunny or it has to be Logan Paul. I go, yeah, Logan Paul's that borderline. Yeah, he's wrestling kind of thing, but I'm talking about a wrestler. Let's have a real actual wrestlers like that. That's what I'm talking about. And again, there's all kinds of ways to write the story. As I was texting to you, who's to say, someone out there goes and makes a ploy for this. And I even talked to you, said, well, we're coming to the end here. Like, do you think this could be a ploy where someone makes this a $500,000 card, possibly a $250,000 card? Because who's to say that we don't see $1 million card in less than 10 years, as Jeremy's been promoting it's like that. Mm-hmm. And he's the guy that I would say also saying, oh, I go out there, I'll make a ploy. I'll bump this up to $250,000, $500,000. And in 1 to 2 years, I'll resubmit this out there. And then someone else is going to want to buy because I've made it now. That floor level has been raised such a high point now. Why the hell wouldn't it be $1 million card at this point now? There's a lot of factors that go into play here. It's like that. And David, you would know better than anybody really on this kind of thing. It's not manipulation of the market. It's causing a stock item to become valuable. And in order to become valuable, someone has to set a precedence for it, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what was really fascinating about this is I got messaged by the guy that bought that $52,000 Hulk Hogan. And Danny Andrews, he goes by Uncle Danny on Twitter. He knows this guy as well. He says he got an immediate $250,000 offer on it, that his Hogan.
Yeah.
And I can't. I mean, Danny said that the guy's done work for him, like he knows the guy. So I mean, I don't know, but I think what you're touching on, Tony, is so accurate. Is once something gets off the ground, right? So like when I first started promoting, if you will, the Hogan, when it was a couple $100 card, was we just needed to get off the ground. Once it's deemed valuable, then it's just sort of deemed valuable, right? And so now what you have is you've got an astonishing sale, right? A huge sale that another is, I mean, listen, 132,000, me, you, the next person, we're not spending that on a wrestling card. I'll be the first to say it. I do know there was a couple of hardcore wrestling collectors that were bidding on the card. I think some of them tapped out under 100. I don't know for sure, but that's a lot of money for a trading card. I mean, listen, let's not pretend. I mean, that's real money. And what I would say though is that, to your point, if a sort of known person decides to pay 200,000, well, all of a sudden it gives people more confidence to pay 400,000 or 600,000, And so, yeah, we are now in a stage where bigger players, people with bigger pockets, are starting to promote the stuff, and it's not our little game anymore.
No, and it's a good thing, I think, too, because we've sat here and we've had many different discussions about this on various podcasts in the past, where we've talked about, wrestling card collectors and the hobby itself wants to be taken seriously. And the Rock card that sold for 126, that set the tone that this is a serious market. And then we're like, well, let's look back at some of our older stuff out there. Why aren't these Hogan cards and Flair and Andre, these older cards? These are iconic people that are within this hobby. And I think those cards should be more valuable as well. And all it took was somebody to have some deep pockets. And this is just the beginning. I think Jeremy is right on the head when it comes to within 10 years. I would say probably within 5. I think we're going to see someone probably hit that $750,000 to $1 million card, because there's going to be some big players. It doesn't have to be a Jeremy. It could be a Drake. It could be a Gary V. It could be anybody who's got, I'm sorry, got fuck you money. It doesn't matter. It's a serious market now, and
Well,
I'm excited to see it after all these years.
you said Gary Vee, right? And
Yep.
Jeremy, so Jeremy is active on Instagram and Twitter. I mean, I've seen his post, obviously.
Yep.
Gary Vee commented on Jeremy's post on Instagram. He's like, vintage wrestling cards are fire, right? Now, Gary Vee, it wouldn't surprise me if he's the guy that won it. Time will tell. I mean, I have no reason to know if he bid or not, but I will say this: he does have one of the Ric Flair 10s, and he bought that a long time ago. And so, what I think people have to understand is you get guys like, okay, Gary Vee's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. That's not a debatable fact, right?
Mhm.
And when you get that wealthy and you die, the government's taking half of it. Okay. There's no hiding from that. When you have an estate tax problem, they're taking the dough. And so think about that. If he goes and buys a wrestling card for 200,000, just for argument's sake, it really only cost him 100,000, because eventually the government's getting half of that. So if it goes up to 200,000, he's made his money back and he still has the card, right? But more importantly, he gets to appease himself. He gets to say, hey, I have the best of the best, or I have what everybody wants. So what I'd always said was with wrestling cards was that you have these apex items, and they in sports cards, they have massive bragging rights, right? Like you say you've got a top LeBron or you've got a top Jordan, it's a big deal, big time Mickey Mantle. Well, now all of a sudden you get 132,000 print on a Hogan card. Tony, you sold that Cosmos back, and that was a high print. That was a near record sale at the time. I mean, that was a very big number. And all of a sudden, 18,000 all of a sudden starts to look normal when something sells for 132.
Exactly. And that's part of, like, when Paul and I were doing monthly recaps and promoting the top 10s all the time. It takes $2,000 to $3,000 now just to hit the top 10 sales per month.
And there's always a Hogan.
There's always a Hogan, and it's irregardless to who the name is on the card. To be honest with you, I'm just looking at from the total values from the hobby itself, and to having cards that are consistently hitting 3, 4, and 5 figures sometimes now. I mean, this was unheard of 10 years ago. I mean,
well, let me tell you guys.
In 2005, when I sold the Trish Stratus 5 of 5 autograph, 5 of 5 autograph relic card for $1,650. That was like, holy cow, that was amazing, deal kind of.
Ever.
Yeah. And then next thing you know, now I wouldn't even crack the top 15,
well,
20.
Let me tell you guys something interesting. Tomorrow, thanks, Drake was kind enough to update me on his big numbers at the National. He sold his Vince Superfractor, his Roman Superfractor, and his Brock. He made away like a bandit. And I've updated the top 15, and the lowest card, number 15, is now 30 grand. So we got 132 at the top for the Hogan this weekend, all the way down to the Vince, actually, which was sold by Drake to a guy. And I verified with the guy that bought these 3 cards. So there we are. We're at $30,000 at the low end. And that's what I like about it. I mean, no disrespect to the Panini product, but having that rock sitting off on its own at the 126 was not representative in my mind of what really was happening with all these other Hogans in the top tier. And it almost seemed like we were stuck at this 55 grand mark. So everyone thought, oh, that's quite a ways away. It's a galaxy away from the 6-figure rock. But it wasn't really. We just needed to see this sale. And as you guys both alluded to, now we're going to see more of them. And there's more of these cards, and we might see some of the cards recirculating and guys, wetting their beak, which is fine, but it's indicative. In my mind, this is the card that should be the most valuable wrestling card, whether it's this one, whether it's a BGS that comes up, or if we one day find a 10, but this is the iconic card. And we've had this conversation before that people are looking for a substitute, but that ship has sailed. There isn't one. This is the definitive card in
Well, the substitute matter comes into play now for the lower graded type cards now, or raw, while that number probably will start to rise a bit, undoubtedly, people are like, well, Jesus Christ, I'm out of the game now when it comes to PSA 9s, then the 8s and then the 7s and the 6s. And there's guys now like, I'll be happy with a PSA 1 for all I care, just to say I have one,
That
and wrong with that, man. It's an iconic card, it's an iconic set, and we all, most of us anyways recognize that. So I'm happy to see it. And what's different about this one as well, as opposed to the Rock one, the Rock is a one of one. Okay. I'm a one who I don't agree with the fact that someone would get it graded, and Jesus Christ, it's a brand new card of a pack, still gets a 7 for crying out loud. But it's basically a unicorn. Okay. So it's a one of one. That doesn't really sit well with me either, in the sense that, well, what would the next, Rock one of one or this one of one? No, and nothing really became of that. Again, like you said to Paul, we were sitting at $50,000 range for some of these iconic cards, these older vintage cards. This is now an older vintage card that has now set a new benchmark. Now there's so many other of these old vintage cards that are probably going to start seeing some play out of this now. So, like I said, people are wetting their beaks. Probably want to go out there and say, well, Jesus, what the hell is my 7 worth now? Maybe I should put that in the market. Hey, what's my Ric Flair 10 worth? What's my, Von Erich, 10 worth? We don't know now. I think the market's going to shift and change a bit more now.
Yeah,
well,
it's gonna lift everything, I believe.
it'll lift the apex items, right?
Yes,
Like,
big
and
ones.
one of the things we've got to keep in mind is pick a Hogan 5, okay? Prior to this auction, and listen, I mean, I want the 82 All-Stars Hogan to go up. They've been going down, okay? We have been seeing 8s, 7s, 6s, 5s, all of them have been just modestly trending lower this year. Now we've seen a couple sales in the last 2 days that sort of reset the market right back to where it was. But there will be situations where a 5 doesn't necessarily do amazing numbers because there's enough of them, right? Okay. But what I will say is that you start getting into cards that we all sort of agree that matter and that don't have a large supply. I do think this sale ultimately helps them.
I think
What
it helps it a bit more than what the Rock 101 did. That's my point that I was getting to, is
Oh,
that
100%,
and,
100%.
and people were speculating when the Rock 101 sold, think, well, what is my 9 comic images autographed, Rock going to go for now, because that's such a hard card to come by too. It's like, well, it may be a hard card to come by, but it's not a 101. So, but it didn't really change the market where we saw everything just kind of fluctuating upwards. Now, granted, we've had, Roman's king, when it comes to the modern market right now, with a $30,000, was it $40,000 sale we had at a Roman Reigns card like that. I'm going to quote David Peck here: "Time will tell." When it comes to whether or not it's going to hold that kind of value over the years,
Yeah,
but
we'll see.
we'll see. It's just the Hogan card, and anything from that particular era. It could have been an Andre. It could have been anything. It could have been the stuff from Japan. That stuff is going to actually, I think, have more of a ripple effect than I think the Rock card will.
Yeah, sure, because this is stuff that through grassroots, through as many years, a decade and a half now, since your early days, David, when you started collecting them, there's just been growth in the value and the equity in those cards, right? When you're talking about a predetermined one of one manufactured scarcity situation where we all know that the first black prism of the top guy is going to be the top card, probably of all of modern, and it was, right? Now, that's the end of the conversation. But in the Apex cards, David, as you refer to them as, there's going to be all sorts of movement, and sometimes we're going to see things trending down slightly, but on the whole, we're going to see a lift for sure, especially now that we're at this point. And to, again, agree with both of you, we're not done. We're going to see more of this stuff. And
Yeah,
again, it happened in a relatively short period of time, right? That we went from 55 to 132 and a few deep pockets, Tony, like you suggest. And, people like wrestling cards for sure.
I talked about this morning. This morning, I drove all the way out to Mesa because a radio station I ended up doing, they wanted to interview, talking about the store that I have, and then also trying to talk about cards. And I'm like, shit, yeah, I'm happy to talk about cards. And so it was a nice talk, and we did briefly talk about the Hogan card, and now how it's just something that validates the hobby as a collectible world that should be taken seriously. Jesus, we just had an F1 card sell for $1 million. So it's F1 for crying out loud. I mean, wrestling is not far behind. It shouldn't even be behind F1 anyways, but that's besides the point.
It was a huge weekend in the collectibles world. The slippers from Wizard of Oz went for $32 million. It's the biggest memorabilia from a movie ever. The Caitlin card went for, I don't
Two
remember,
something, 236 or something.
36 million.
Second or third highest female card ever printed, And then in our little world, here comes Hulk Hogan All Stars at 132. So,
Was all of this done on Heritage, by the way? Because I'm going to give my guy over at Heritage a call. It's like
yeah, all three of them.
And oh, great! I'm going to
Yeah.
say dinner's on me
No,
next.
sorry. I think Golden may have been on the basket on the Caitlin one, but
Caleb, yeah.
definitely. Well, I was telling Susan, because she was watching on NBC News, Lester Holt, that they were talking about the glass slippers. I said, yeah, they won't talk about the Hogan when they're doing that. But in our little world, it's big. It's really big, and it's exciting for us because we follow this stuff daily, and we have the cards. We talk about the cards, and this is a significant day. When we do our wrap up of the year, this will be something that we'll talk about. The night that Hogan became the number one. And expect us to have more of these, sooner than you think, Tony, because you're right. When you asked me yesterday, when did the rock go exactly? I knew what you were thinking. You were trying to calculate this is way sooner than any of us expected. But, we had a feeling, didn't we, David? So, all good.
I was going to make a post about it, but I'm so, afraid to pull the trigger sometimes on shit that I really want to say because I ignite fire with certain people out there that I don't want to ignite because I don't have time to sit here and banter back and forth.
Yeah, we can get into trouble sometimes.
Yeah, it's just in a way it's like it's a validation in the sense that it just has to be somebody out there who's willing to spend the money to kind of do that. And nobody in this discussion right now is going to go out and spend $500,000 on a card like that I'm aware of. But there's a lot of players out there who probably go like, Jesus, I was a wrestling fan for a long time. Why am I not tapping into this markets like that in this hobby? Whether it be for financial gains and purposes, big dick cards, as I call them, whatever you want, whatever how you look at them. It's a fun time right now. And it's just nice to be validated as a collector, as a longtime collector in a hobby that I've loved for so long.
Well, the Instagram dude that bought Drake's 3 cards, bought the Roman Black, when I was communicating with him, I went and took a look at what he has, and it's remarkable. The amount of high-end modern, and not just wrestling. So this is what we're talking about. We're talking about super collectors here that just buy top of the top because they get it. They have the money, they have the seed money to get into it, and that's what they do. They buy these big pieces and they sit on them, and they all come out flush at the end for sure, especially on the Apex stuff.
Yep.
I just feel like honestly, this was a verification of what all three of us have been fighting for a long time. I've always just kind of wanted the hobby to be taken seriously. Like to me, wrestling is part of pop culture. Wrestling is, if you sit there and chat with some random person at a bar or wherever, most of them will talk about wrestling. They know they watched it when they were kids or, other periods of their life. But I think our hobby has always been kind of looked at as second best. And, now all of a sudden you start having, blockbuster sales, where it's like, wait a second, hey, we're showing up at the table. And, I think that, getting back to the rock sale, when you have, I'll use the word or the term, manufactured scarcity, it is designed to play to the ego. But so is card grading. My 9 is better than your 8 or 7 or whatever. I mean, it's the same concept. Collectibles appeal to the ego. And so this Hogan card is an ego card. So it is going to, it had an ego price. But I'll tell you what, there were big high rollers that lost, so think how that feels,
Yeah.
When all of a sudden, you've got a serious net worth and you didn't take home the prize. So I think that is pretty awesome too, because, I had talked with Jeremy Padawar, a few years back, and I was out walking my dog and all of a sudden I get a text from Jeremy Padawar and we're texting and he said, this thing's going to break 100,000. And I don't know. I feel like he would have claimed it if he wanted. So who knows? But, there's guys like that have serious money. I'm not talking, a few million. I'm talking real, millions. And when they start sniffing around for this type of merchandise, it's good for everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's been a great weekend, and going to kind of ride high off this for a while, so like that, because I think that we're going to probably start seeing some consistency in sales that are going to exceed the 50K mark. Probably won't hit the six figures in that sense, but it's gonna be speculation of like, hey, Ric Flair's getting up there in years. I better go grab me a nine real quick, so like that, because I saw what the Hogan did, and that could turn to six figures if I pick up a Ric Flair for 50 grand. That might. I mean, who knows? It's an open market right now. I think it's great, and I think it's going to be less than within 5 years before we see that seven-figure wrestling card.
Well,
Well, I tell you, I've been somebody that's been was hoping a Logan Paul card would come out just because I felt like it would be kind of goose the market, right? Like, I mean, it would be like you'd have to think it would do well. I mean, he'd buy his own card,
Of course,
so you'd be bidding against the house. I'm not sure why one hasn't come, but don't sleep on that card. I mean,
no. I mean, if it came out, you're right. But we're talking licensing deals too, so like that. So basically, a non-wrestler working the most part-time-ish type wrestling schedule you could possibly have. It makes sense. It's like why you can't get a Bad Bunny and stuff like that. It's a licensing deal that is just eclipses what the cost would be in order to get the guy to sign to go into product, and it just becomes it's a nightmarish deal. It's not like they haven't tried to do this kind of stuff before. Panini tried, Topps tried before that. I'm sure Topps will try it again. We'll probably maybe see a Rock autograph card. Who knows? I'm sure that's probably going to be part of the play with Fanatics. And if anybody can get that done at B Fanatics, they've got the pocket to do it. And that would set things on fire a bit. But yeah, I agree. Logan Paul, like again, you're betting on it's against the house on that one. I mean, why would he? It fits right into the whole ego type stuff, So why
yeah,
not? I paid $1 million for my own card. Haha, f you. Um,
exactly. He
yeah.
would do it and like spike the football, like,
This
I
teaches
mean,
us to never say never, right? To not be surprised. Here we are sitting short time after The Rock with the new number one, and before you know it, we'll be doing it again. So, don't blink on modern. There could be a one-on-one Rock. There could be, God knows. Um, but I like what's happening with the Wrestling All-Stars, particularly the Hogan, because now it seems to be getting into the tier or the range where I've always thought it ought to be relative to the rest of the cards in the hobby.
well, listen, I mean, here's the thing is Hulk Hogan, my premise the entire time has been Hulk Hogan's a real celebrity. Okay. Unfortunately, I've never really had a very good interaction with Hulk. I get the feeling that he thinks I'm a profiteer. If he only knew, I've never sold any of the stuff I've gotten signed, but they've just never been that great of interaction. The bottom line is when you see Hulk Hogan in person, you feel like you're in front of a real celebrity. I mean, it is a take your breath away kind of moment. Like, oh my gosh, here's Hulk. So I think that he is probably easily top 25 most recognizable people in the world. He can't go anywhere without people being like, that's Hulk Hogan.
yeah.
And that's worth something.
Absolutely.
What was interesting is when he did the speech for Trump, his cards actually started going down. A lot of typical wrestling collectors are, these really, really far left woke people now. I mean, you see that in all the wrestling talk online. It's a lot of it. And so Hogan's cards, I mean, they started to drop right after he came out for Trump. But I have a feeling this is going to help with a U-turn.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain guys like him and Flair that, despite their personalities and some of, what they're accused of certain things like that and the accusations and their personality, like some of these guys are bulletproof, and it's just like here's a Vince McMahon who's done some of the most despicable things on the planet, basically, and it hasn't hurt his value at all when it
I,
comes from.
I've been saying since I've been watching, I'm older than you guys by a little bit, not by much, but by a little. And I've been watching wrestling since I was 7 years old. And I still say to this day, there's Hulk Hogan and there's Ric Flair, then there's everybody else. And you can fight about twos and threes and Rushmores, but those two guys stand alone. And they haven't been replaced by anybody, nor will they anytime soon.
Well, I mean, the thing about Ric Flair is he is clearly a better wrestler than Hulk Hogan. But Hulk Hogan has so many of the most iconic moments in wrestling. The LJN figures, you know, the fact that uh, millions of those were sold and people were just, I mean, in '85, when Hogan really took off, I mean, it just was unbelievable.
It was the
And
greatest run in wrestling history.
no, I don't think it's even close. I mean, listen, I'm 45, so I got to see The Rock, in his prime. And he had some tremendous moments, don't get me wrong. But John Cena had some tremendous moments. But there's just nothing like watching old Hogan.
I was at the WrestleMania where Hogan fought The Rock, so it was interesting for me, the whole dichotomy of that. But I was also at Six with the Ultimate Warrior and Hogan. And the noise for Six, I've never heard anything like that in my life ever, even at rock concerts. And I used to go to a lot of music shit when I was younger. Um, Hogan, like you remember what happened the night after WrestleMania in Montreal. They stood and they clapped for Hogan for like 15 minutes straight. That's how well he's respected amongst us, like people that have been exposed to wrestling for not just last 4 or 5 years, but some of us were younger, some of us were in our teens, like I was when he started. But the right, in my mind, it's deserved. A lot of people have negative things to say about him, and it hurts me, that guys I like, unfortunately, have sides of their personality or their character, like Vince, like Ric Flair, like Hogan. But in my mind, all three of them are icons, and you can't take that away from any of them.
I don't disagree, but I do. I've never been a Hogan fan, so for both as a performer or as a person. So, and this is someone who I sat and had a lengthy conversation with him in a green room, which is I told you this before, Paul. I sat there and I had just myself, Hogan, Ralph Macchio, Brandon Ruth, Sean Astin, all sitting at a table together from a Comic Con, and ended up just being Hogan and I just sitting there for a while, having a conversation. Telling me about his back surgeries and showing me the scars in his back. And he was nice and polite, but still didn't change my opinion of him.
And David, you had
He's
that night with Ric Flair several years ago,
Oh, well, listen, I mean, that was
and you
insane
speak so
because
highly of that.
um here's the thing is that was I got so lucky that Charlotte Flair, his daughter, got into a car wreck. So at the 53-minute mark, his phone kept ringing. He goes, David, I'm really sorry. I got to take this. And it was Charlotte and anyway, or Ashley, whatever. And she had gotten hit by in a car accident. And so he's like, oh, do you want me to send a car for you? And anyway, so all of a sudden he goes, we have more time. So I had only was gonna, I paid like there was certainly it was not a pro bono thing, but we were supposed to get an hour and I got 2 hours and 22 minutes. But I will say this, the next time I saw Rick, he remembered me, but it's not like I'm like his, best friend. He did give me his phone number. I still periodically text him stuff like when a collectibles, sells or whatever, and he'll text right back. But we're not, I'm not on some kind of like tight level with them. I think what it really boils down to is fans got to understand that we're just fans.
Exactly.
And you just do your best to um they're they're your heroes. They're maybe not your heroes. They're just somebody you've seen on TV, but we're on the outside looking in most cases, right? And that was probably the best splurge I've ever done on myself because it just was so fun. And, to sit there and, rub elbows with Ric Flair and talk wrestling and stuff. It was great. But, like Tony's saying with Hulk, I mean, I've never had a good exchange with Hulk. Um, some people have, but I don't look at these wrestlers, I'm not trying to put them on a pedestal of morality, right? Um, Hulk Hogan and Terry Bollea are two different people.
Exactly.
And I'm
are,
a fan of Hulk Hogan.
are they really at this point by now?
Well, I mean, listen, he lives his gimmick, but I just mean in terms of I'm not looking when I sit on a Saturday and watch Hulk Hogan from 1985, I'm not really worried about what Terry Bollea is doing in a strip club, or if, he's fooling around with, his best friend's wife. Like those are just, I don't even think about it. Ric Flair. I mean, gosh, Ric Flair's got a horrifying history of screwing people over for money and so on. But when I'm sitting there watching an interview from 1986 on World Championship Wrestling and him talking about having, a limousine a mile long with, 25 women just wanting to say, woo, like, sorry, I'm just focused on that.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, and these guys, like I said, bulletproof. So, and the card market's going to continue to keep rising no matter what with these guys. And it's just been a fun, exciting weekend to see that kind of go. And it's just nice to, again, get that next level up to be considered. We're the hobby's a serious player within all of trading.
Yeah, very good, guys. So that's it. Just wanted to have a quickie just to sort of celebrate that we have a new record, $132,000 for Wrestling All Stars. David Peck, Tony Vela, thank you very much for spending some time with us tonight, and we'll catch up with you guys soon.
Got it, man.